Thank you. Mr. McKay, would you agree that the industry ought to be using the best available technology to avoid these cataclysmic blowouts?
Yes.
Now, I'm told that in other places in the world, let me back up for a moment, we've learned through some of the investigation that a possible source of failure was the failure for an activation signal in some sense to be given to the blowout preventer. I don't think that's been categorically proven, but there's some suggestion that that's what happened from some interruption of the connection to the activation switch. We're advised that in other places in the world, in Norway and Brazil, an acoustically triggered switch is available that is remote to the rig so that it's not dependent on a physical linkage between the blowout preventer and the rig, that it receives an acoustic signal of a blowout occurring and immediately sends through, I believe, a sonar system to activate the blowout preventer. And the safety of that seems to me common sense in the sense it's not dependent on a physical connection as this one was, and that physical connection may have been interrupted in the explosion, in the blowout. To me, that seems to be another inherent safety feature that is used in other countries. Was that system used on this particular rig?
Well, I'm not a blowout preventer expert, and maybe these guys can answer as well, but I think it's something that needs to be looked at. As I understand it, the acoustic signaling, is not always applicable in some of the places like the Deepwater Gulf of Mexico. We did have redundant systems here to try to trigger the blowout preventer, including physical manual intervention with the ROV.
I understand that. I guess those all depend on a physical connection to the rig platform.
Or the lack of.
Or the lack of. This one has a remote system, and it seems to be used by giving you an additional redundancy, if you will. Let's just be clear. Was that system in place in this rig? Does anybody have a suggestion that it was? No one's shaking their head. Yes. So we're assuming there was no acoustical activated trigger. Now, assuming that, and I'll just ask Mr. McKay, assuming that this acoustically triggered system would provided an added layer of redundancy that could operate even in the absence of any physical connection between the blowout preventer and the rig, would BP be willing to accept that technology as the best available technology?
We would absolutely accept anything that would improve upon what we have in terms of redundancy. So I would ask some of the experts that, but we would be willing to do that if that looked like it would help anything, yeah.
And was that ever considered by British Petroleum to require that in its operations at any time?
I don't know.
Could you find that out and let us know? Do any of the other witnesses have information about that as to whether or not the acoustically triggered device was ever considered by British Petroleum? Do you have any information, any of the other witnesses?
I would not.
No information, no.
I don't think it would be appropriate for me to comment on what BP may or may not have considered.
Well, we'll look forward to your letting us know, Mr. McKay. There's been some press reports that the cost dissuaded British Petroleum from installing this additional safety mechanism. So we'll be interested to see what you find out in your review. I want to ask about the capability of the shearing system. And I have to just tell you, as a layperson, I've been disturbed by the lack of reliability of this system from what I've been able to look at. I'm looking at a document. It's a study done from the U.S. Minerals Management Service by West Engineering Services of December 2002. And the report suggests that they tested several of these blowout preventers and said if operational considerations of the initial drilling program were accounted for, shearing success dropped to 3 of 6, 50%. 50% is not something that gives you huge confidence. The report goes on to say West, that's the contractor here who did the investigation, West is unaware of any regulatory requirements that state the obvious, that the BOP must be capable of shearing pipe planned for use in the current drilling program. And apparently there's no regulatory requirement that there's been a demonstration of a particular BOP to shear a particular pipe of a particular metallurgical situation. Is that accurate? Mr. Moore, you might be the one most knowledgeable about
Let me
this.
respond to that, because Cameron took a position on this in 2007 with a study that we did with our own information on shearing capabilities, where we plotted across a matrix of low, medium, and high shear rates to shear certain size drill pipe. We took the top end of that. We took the maximum range in which shear pipe should be sheared, because shear pipe is different strengths at different hardnesses, so it's not altogether exactly consistent. So
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Moore. I just have a real quick question I want to ask Mr. McKay. Mr. McKay, in September 14, 2009, BP sent a letter to the U.S. Department of Interior Minerals Management. You said, quote, while BP is supportive of companies having a system in place to reduce risks, accidents, injuries, and spills, we are not supportive of the extensive prescriptive regulations as proposed in this rule. That's signed by Richard Morrison, Vice President, GOM Production. Do you plan on revisiting that position by BP in light of this incident?
I think everything we learn in this incident will be relevant in terms of what regulations should be going forward.
Well, I appreciate that. I'll be introducing a bill here shortly that will require the use of best available technologies. It's motivated in part because of the absence of this particular safety device, this acoustic device we're talking about. So I'd appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
I would thank you, Mr. Inslee.